In 1943, Joseph Goebbels broadcast a simple equation to the German people. America, 130 million citizens, fragmented, mongrelized, incapable of unified industrial output. Germany, 80 million, racially pure, the most efficient war machine in human history. The math was clear. The Reich would outlast the decadent West. On May 13, 1943, that equation collapsed. General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim surrendered Army Group Africa in Tunisia. Between 150,000 and 230,000 Axis soldiers, the Wehrmacht's most experienced desert fighters, became prisoners. Within weeks, the first transports departed for America. What happened next was not imprisonment. It was psychological demolition. If you're interested in how wars are actually decided by logistics, math, and doctrine, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for more in-depth World War analysis. Let's continue. The US War Department faced a logistics problem. By summer 1943, Allied POW camps in North Africa held 130,000 Germans. The facilities were temporary. The guards were needed elsewhere, and every ton of food shipped to feed prisoners was a ton not reaching combat units. The solution was industrial. Move the problem. Ship captured Germans 4,000 miles across the Atlantic to camps built on American soil. The mathematics were brutal in their efficiency. Liberty ships returning empty from European supply runs could carry 3,000 prisoners per voyage. By peak operation, 30,000 POWs crossed monthly. The vessels, each assembled from 250,000 standardized parts in an average of 42 days, had already delivered their cargo of tanks, ammunition, and aircraft. The prisoners were ballast, human return freight. The SS Robert E. Peary held the construction record. 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes from keel to launch. The Germans didn't know this yet. They would learn. The 2-week Atlantic crossing initiated the first phase of cognitive fracture. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann, 90th Light Division, documented the arithmetic of waste. Each day, American mess crews disposed of unconsumed rations, half-eaten steaks, whole loaves of bread, gallons of expired milk. They did this openly, without thought. Zimmermann calculated that the daily waste aboard his transport ship exceeded his company's weekly allocation during the final months in Africa. This was not psychological warfare. This was standard naval provisioning. The ships themselves delivered the second data point. Liberty-class vessels, 441 feet in length, 2,500 horsepower triple expansion steam engines, radar arrays rotating above the bridge, technology the Germans believed existed only in limited British and German naval applications. Here, it was standard equipment on a cargo ship, one of 2,610 identical vessels. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Steuben, Prussian aristocracy, later wrote, "Watching that radar antenna, I first suspected Germany had already lost the war." He was correct. The math had, the foot changed. August 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. 4,300 acres of operational port infrastructure. Cranes cycling continuously across miles of dock. 47 cargo vessels in simultaneous loading operations. Daily tonnage throughput exceeded Hamburg's weekly capacity. The prisoners marched past parking lots. This detail requires emphasis. Hundreds of private automobiles, owned by dock workers, manual laborers. In Germany, the Volkswagen program had delivered fewer than 1,000 vehicles to civilians since 1934. Private automobile ownership remained the privilege of party officials and industrial elites. Here, factory workers drove to morning shifts. The trains waiting at the depot completed the inversion. Not freight cars. Not the 40 and 8 wagons, 40 men or 8 horses that had transported German troops across Europe. Pullman coaches, padded seats converting to sleeping berths, dining cars with white tablecloths, air conditioning units, malfunctioning, according to an apologetic American sergeant. The Germans boarded like tourists, Oberleutnant Erich Hoffmann, IG Farbenchemist, understood immediately what he was seeing: excess capacity. America had so much rolling stock, so much infrastructure, so much everything, that enemy prisoners traveled in conditions exceeding German officer transport. This was not generosity. This was the weight of industrial surplus. The 3-day journey to Texas became a rolling exhibition of American productive capacity. The evidence arrived in categories. Category 1, electrification. Every town, Martinsville, Danville, Greensboro, blazed with electric light at 2200 hours. Shop windows, street lamps, private residences with multiple illuminated rooms. Germany had enforced blackout regulations since 1940. Rural electrification reached barely 20% of German farms. Here, electricity flowed to every farmhouse on the Texas plains. The Rural Electrification Administration had achieved 90% coverage by 1943. Category 2, industrial velocity. At a water stop in Virginia, German prisoners watched American rail workers complete servicing operations in 30 minutes. Automated coal loaders, electric water systems, mechanized lubrication. The same procedures required 2 hours in the Reich. Category 3, consumable waste. American workers drank Coca-Cola from glass bottles and discarded the empties without thought. They smoked cigarettes to the halfway point and crushed them underfoot. They wore leather boots that represented 2 months of German worker wages. Feldwebel Heinrich Müller, a Siemens electrical engineer, performed calculations. A single railway switching yard consumed more electricity per hour than his entire Berlin district consumed per day. He wrote, "The waste was magnificent. They left lights burning in empty buildings. It was the carelessness of infinite resource." But the Americans had made a miscalculation. They assumed German prisoners were a monolithic population, defeated soldiers ready for re-education. They were wrong. Inside the barracks of Camp Hearn, Texas, the Wehrmacht's internal hierarchy reasserted itself within 72 hours of arrival. SS loyalists, Afrika Korps hardliners, men who had sworn blood oaths to the Führer. They organized. The system operated on terror. Any prisoner who spoke favorably of American conditions faced judgment. Informal tribunals convened after lights out. The charges: defeatism, collaboration, ideological betrayal. Corporal Hugo Kraus listened to American radio broadcasts in his bunk. He was found beaten with wooden planks. The perpetrators were never identified. Former POW Heino Eriksson later described the protocol. Don't tell anybody how you feel unless you are absolutely certain they feel the same way. The Americans had imported a civil war onto Texas soil. The hardliners had a theory. The abundance was fabrication, Jewish trickery, propaganda camps, constructed specifically to demoralize prisoners. Beyond the fences, they insisted, real America was collapsing. This position became increasingly difficult to maintain. By September 1943, American labor shortages forced a policy decision. German prisoners would work. Geneva Convention protocols prohibited direct war production labor, but the regulations permitted agricultural work, factory maintenance, infrastructure support. The technicality placed Wehrmacht veterans inside the American industrial machine. Near Detroit, prisoners unloaded coal at a power station with sightlines to the River Rouge complex. 100,000 workers, 1.5 million kilowatts of daily electrical consumption. Assembly lines producing jeeps, aircraft engines, B-24 components. More power consumption than the city of Hamburg. At Ford's Willow Run plant, visible from the rail line, a single facility produced one B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. 42,000 workers, 150,000 parts per aircraft, 2.5 million square feet of floor space. Hauptmann Werner Berg, Luftwaffe pilot captured over Tunisia, counted 17 bombers in various assembly stages through the train window. He wrote, "We had been told American aircraft were inferior, hastily built. I could see the precision of the assembly. These were not inferior machines. They were simply built faster than we could imagine. The question haunted American military police throughout the war. These men were enemy combatants. They worked adjacent to critical infrastructure: cotton gins, grain elevators, rail yards. Why didn't they sabotage? The answer was strategic calculation. The prisoners had computed the math. Germany could not win. The question was no longer victory. It was inheritance. They wanted to learn the system, not destroy it. American commanders understood something the Germans initially did not. The food was not hospitality. It was ammunition. Daily rations at Camp Herne exceeded what German civilians had received since 1939. Fresh milk, eggs, meat at quantities approaching peacetime American consumption. White bread. The prisoners ate 3,000 calories per day. Their families in Hamburg subsisted on 1,500. Christmas 1943 delivered the final psychological payload: 500,000 care packages distributed to German prisoners. Cigarettes, candy, toiletries, games. Local churches performed German Christmas carols. Boy Scout troops delivered handmade cards. Women's auxiliaries baked cookies for men whose brothers were bombing American cities. Oberleutnant Walter Müller, whose sibling had died in the Hamburg firestorm, wrote, "They know we are enemies. Many have sons fighting against our armies. Yet they show us Christian charity. What kind of people treat enemies this way? Only those absolutely certain of victory." The Christmas feast included turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, ice cream, quantities that Germany had not seen since before the First World War. Administered to prisoners of war. June 6, 1944. News of the Normandy invasion reached the camps within hours. 6,139 vessels, 11,590 aircraft, 156,000 men in the initial assault wave, 15,000 tons of supplies delivered daily across open beaches through artificial harbors assembled from prefabricated components. The prisoners watched newsreel footage. The scale was incomprehensible. Lieutenant Friedrich von Teuben wrote, "We knew then that everything was lost. Not just the war, the entire Nazi project. We had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with fairy tales and racial mythology." April 1945 delivered the final data point. As Allied forces liberated concentration camps across Germany, the footage was screened for prisoners. Many refused to believe. Propaganda, they insisted. Then the letters arrived from home, confirming the scope. Hauptmann Walter Schmidt wrote the summary. "We thought we were warriors for a great cause. We discovered we were tools of criminals. The Americans we called weak and decadent showed us what civilization actually meant." Between 1945 and 1946, the United States repatriated 383 German prisoners of war. Escape attempts during the entire program, 2,022. Successful permanent escapes, 0. Post-war surveys indicated 74% of former POWs believed captivity had fundamentally altered their worldview. The trains that carried Wehrmacht soldiers into Texas in 1943 had transported believers in Aryan supremacy and American weakness. The ships that returned them to Germany in 1946 carried architects of democratic reconstruction. Hans Kroll, prisoner at Camp Shelby, later West German ambassador to the United States. Walter Hallstein, Camp Kosciuszko, later President of the European Commission. Eduard Ackermann, Fort Robinson, leader of German agricultural reform. The economic miracle that rebuilt West Germany in the 1950s drew on knowledge acquired in American prison camps. Mass production methodology, agricultural, mechanization, democratic institutional design. The prisoners had arrived expecting a collapsing nation. They discovered an industrial colossus that fed its enemies better than Germany fed its soldiers. In 1985, surviving German POWs held a reunion in Austin, Texas. Over 500 returned. Many brought their children. Former Stabsfeld-Weibel Kurt Meir, who had worked Iowa farmland, addressed the gathering. "The farmers treated us not as enemies, but as young men far from home. They shared their meals, their knowledge, this humanity, from people whose sons were fighting against us. This changed us forever. Hermann Goering had promised razor blades and refrigerators. He was half right. America produced 17.3 million refrigerators during the war years. It also produced 324,000 aircraft, 88,000 tanks, 2,700 Liberty ships, and 371,683 converted prisoners. The most powerful weapon in the American arsenal was not the atomic bomb. It was the simple, overwhelming evidence of what free people could build. We who came as conquerors left as students. Former Oberleutnant Hermann Goetz, 1985. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.